So let's
they're
talk
all
about
extreme.
peaks and valleys then.
I think we're in a valley right now. Is kind of how I feel.
Yeah, me too.
Which is different from a week ago.
Exactly.
It's just fucking
The
crazy.
roller coaster. Why don't we call it that? The marketing roller coaster. Wing It Podcast, goosedigital.com, episode 85. Who do we have?
Chris O'Neill.
Robin Kroll.
Kevin Butler.
Michael Turksani.
The gang's back.
Hello.
Yay. January.
This might be our first kind of full podcast of the new year.
It is.
So.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. Everybody together again.
2023.
2023.
Making sure we get that year out there.
Yeah, it is important.
2023.
Yeah, the year is
Can't
important.
tell by our outfits. It's 2023.
Yeah, if you can't tell by Chris's haircut, it's 2023 still.
Because we were
know what that
saying
means.
we were wearing the same clothes in 2022. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. We're gonna look back on this in 30 years, and we're gonna be like, "What's going on?" Oh, it'll come back. It'll come back, right?
Yeah.
Maybe
Just
that's a good
like
segue.
everything
I feel like
does.
we're gonna look back on this in a month and say, "Wow, I felt like a different time too."
Oh yeah. Well, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about? We're talking about trends, roller coaster, State of the Union. What are we talking about?
Maybe the state of marketing in Q1 of 2023.
Yeah.
Because it feels and looks a bit different than Q4 of 2022.
Yeah. Just a few weeks ago.
Which is the roller coaster and brings in the trends, right? So all wrapped up there.
Yeah.
So we've seen. Okay. So maybe we'll start with. Well, why don't we just start with a little bit of the ups and downs that we've been observing. So we're in. I don't know how many sort of deals do you think we're in at any given time? Kev, Chris? 30, 40?
I was going to say 25.
25 close, but in terms of like meeting to closure,
Oh, 40, 50.
yeah. So we got a decent pulse on maybe the landscape of marketing teams and what they're going through.
Well, I've long felt we have such a interesting vantage point, and there's the sales deals, Chris, that you primarily are working in conjunction with some of us who support some of them. But then we have at any given time 60 to 75 active client projects, whether some are retainers, some are just short-term projects.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of have a real full view across, what's probably, I'm kind of rounding up a bit, but 100 organizations at any given time, spread across a diverse group or mix of industries. So it's a pretty compelling view to see what's going on at a high level. Like, it's not like it's just singularly focused on two organizations in a specific industry.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's
No,
balanced.
it's pretty
I feel.
spread out. It's pretty spread out. Financial, tech,
Mm-hmm.
distribution.
Manufacturing.
Healthcare.
Yep,
Size of
healthcare.
organization, sophistication of organization, what they're doing.
Oh, yeah.
So we really do have
the whole
a
gamut,
good
yeah.
perspective. I would agree.
Yeah, they're not really any one type of customer or size really. They're kind of quite varied.
I'd say right now, the similarities have probably never been closer. I think in maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, you could say, well, tech's way over here, and a less aggressive industry or a more mature one is way over there. And I think right now, what we're seeing at the highest level is all marketing efforts need to be centrally rooted back to almost immediate revenue recognition or at least opportunity creation. It's very, I'll call it short-term focused, and no longer are we really hearing anything about brand building and even trying to connect the dots between brand and revenue. It's just like, does this thing drive revenue right now? Will we see the revenue later this year? And that's kind of determining all marketing investment, whether it's like our clients deciding how much they want to put into paid spend, or whether it's new prospects of ours saying, do we even need support on marketing services?
So what prompted this was that we've seen some changes in terms of how the deals are tracking, right? Or just even within our client organizations, prospect organizations, right? They clearly, there's, I would say, some sort of a disconnect between maybe the higher echelons within an organization, and then even maybe down from that, sometimes even at the CMOs, kind of a little bit disconnected from some of those directional changes. Certainly, the directors and sometimes the VPs are not as in touch with where these organizations are going. But I would say in the past, we'd have deals that could just, flow. They'd be marketing teams building their plans. They want to go out and get stuff done. They're engaging an agency. And then what we've observed, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, is that, oh, well, wait a sec. Turns out we're not allowed to do that. Or turns out we've got to make a change. Or, turns out I'm let go and I don't have a job anymore.
Well, so you're
Right?
talking the difference between marketing leader driven decisions for like our kind of deals, and now what it seems like it's more like what I would call CEO or perhaps in some cases CRO driven decisions via marketing.
Yep. So it's pretty well documented the duration of deals increased by 40%, 50%. Salesforce has made some drastic changes in their sales organization as a result of that slowdown and the changes in the way that that deals are being reviewed. And in terms of like the disconnect, I feel like the changes and the almost about face from, listen, we need, marketing had a very, very important place at the table, particularly during COVID, during the sort of digital heyday, where it was like, oh, we got to get the digital thing going. So let's bring marketing in because they know how to get that done. So boom, like we're busy. We're getting stuff done. We're rolling out programs, rolling out stuff. Now all of a sudden, brakes go on. Recession looming, people scared, big changes at the top levels. Like we're seeing a lot of people being like, shot, and then it's like, okay, so who's left? Who do we have left to kind of keep things going?
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of organizations looking to the past, looking to how is it that we're getting deals now, because no one's opening their email anymore. No one has time to open their email and look through a whole bunch of email that's coming in. We're continually, working on the messaging with our clients, continuing to keep a very close eye on what those numbers are. But when we haven't been in there and haven't helped an organization sort of like take a look and connect those dots, we're finding a lot of people saying, no, that doesn't work for us. Doesn't work for you. Well, it doesn't work for you. And now you're going to go back to, 1989 and start putting guys on the phone, trying to phone people up. Well,
I think that's the revenue correlation that I was mentioning.
That is.
Maybe that's a better articulation of it, but it's for business leaders who don't default or skew to marketing as a pro marketing thing. They're kind of going back to like the trenches and what they're comfortable with and what they feel is a bankable area to put resources, kind of like what you're describing, right? And something that I wonder is, at what point do marketers take accountability for the programs that they run and the value they're supposed to bring to the business? Like, marketing is a revenue driving machine, and it's up to that leader to say, this is what we're doing to drive revenue, to clearly articulate and correlate the impact of those efforts. And I feel like marketers have gotten away with not being able to do that because we went through like an 11-year bull run of, marketing, let's go, anything will work, let's buy shitloads of tech stack. But here we are now, and it's like everyone's coming back to their roots and saying, well, is this adding impact? And some of those marketers are saying, well, I don't know.
Oh, for sure they are. They're saying that they don't know, and we could talk about the attribution, but I also think that there's a marketing leadership challenge around integrating with the sales organization. I mean, marketing and sales we've talked about for a long time. How do we get those two sides of the fence working more? So, hey, we have lots of leads. They're sitting here in new status. Or
as a side note, do you think the role of CRO is funny? Because it's like marketing and sales alignment. We're like, well, we need someone who understands both sides to marry these two functions. So it's okay, well, we need a CRO. Everyone's like, yeah, we definitely need a CRO. So what do? They just take someone who's got overweight amount of experience in one of those two functions, and that's the one that's going to marry them. But he or she's kind of like, yeah, but I'm really a salesperson, so we really don't have a true marriage.
Equal balance.
We're just going to go heavier on sales, and it's like,
but
it's still in the same place.
It's challenging, right? So you look at an overall, budget to grow the business, and you're like, well, where are we going to allocate, right? I think maybe that, to your point, Chris, it did skew like really far to to the one side because like, hey, we're not doing events, we're not knocking on doors, we're certainly not doing in-person meetings. Our field team is maybe shrunk or trying to do what they can over Zoom meetings. So marketing, go, build it up, do all these digital, programs and try to drive as much engagement as you can. But along the way, they didn't really get the whole sales plus marketing thing right. And if we're being honest, I think while these programs, a lot of them were probably executed decently well on the digital side, they probably weren't at scale or mature from a learnings perspective. So now you've got
that's a great one. I'm sorry to cut you off, but that reminds me of something.
Well, you're not sorry.
I'm kind of sorry.
No, you're not.
No, not really.
You don't look sorry.
I'm eager.
Zoom in on Kevin. Does he look
sorry? I think what's interesting is you had two kinds of organizations at the onset of the pandemic. You had ones that were fairly deep down the digital side and like sort of digital maturity, and then you had organizations that weren't. And then all of a sudden there's that flip where it's like, digital acceleration's here and everyone's got to do it. And then fast forward, 2.5 years later, here we are. It's different times. Everyone's peeling back. And now whether you were out and ahead, call it April 2020, or whether you're a bit more on maybe the laggard side, you're both back to the starting point. I almost feel like if you were laggard, you're in better shape because the path forward's a bit more obvious because you never really adopted new things. And the companies that did adopt new things and went deeper and deeper, they've probably had to make cuts into those things that they haven't quite fully explored, but gotten down a track of. And now they're sitting here possibly less headcount if staff cuts are involved, less spend to go and continue to see through and understand the performance of these things relative to should we keep doing it or not, and possibly even have all this tech that like we don't really know how to use because we don't have the people or the budget to support it.
But just sorry, Robin, just so I can finish the thought about the marketing leadership, and then we can chime in on those other points, is that where I was going on the marketing leader, whoever that happens to be, and maybe it is the CRO, I don't know if they were around for that time, but if you said, I think for most leaders in an organization, including ours, by the way, if you said, hey, we're actually giving 10 high quality, or just use a low number so that it's easy to wrap your head around, 10 high quality leads a day, a week, to the sales organization, and the sales leaders like, yeah, they are legit. Those are great. They're keeping our team going. Who's going to say no to that? I mean, I'm sure the CEO is not going to be like, oh yeah, let's cut that marketing program out, right? So there's a gap. There's a huge gap between now. Maybe that's a people gap where that marketing leader can't walk into into that sales organization and say, are these valid? Do these make sense to you? I've got 150 leads a week. Do you think any of them are good or bad? Or no, we're doing our own thing. We're tracking and hunting down deals, and we don't care what you're doing. So that's where I think a lot of this is also stemming from, where they can't have that conversation. So now all of a sudden they're not at the table, and it's almost like they don't have credibility.
But if you think, just going back to your point, Mike, we were talking about or maybe it was Kevin, but the digital, and now we're having more in person, right? So those are still marketing driven events, whether it's online or offline, right? So marketing is still responsible for that, whether it's a trade show, it's a conference, it's an email campaign, it's a sponsored LinkedIn campaign. So if marketing is still responsible for that, for driving all of these leads and pushing to the point of the opportunity, and even if the sales team is saying, yeah, these are good, high quality leads and they're working them, there's still that disconnect in many organizations of where these leads are actually coming from. So if the marketing leader can't say, well, those 10 high quality leads that you're getting, I can tell you 5 of them came from our trade show last November and 5 of them came for this particular campaign. How is marketing going to be able to go ahead and drive more of that? How are they going to have any accountability for responsibility? Yeah. And in order to do all this, I know we talked about this before, the attribution, having the right platforms to be able to do all of that, they need to have all of these things in place. So if we're seeing things that people are saying, oh no, we're gonna cut back on this, well, are you cutting back on your marketing spend? Are you cutting back on your technology investment? Are you cutting back on whether it's internal or working with an agency to say, we need to be working with people who can help us connect all those dots and understand where our revenue is actually coming from? These are organizations who are missing out. And I think this is I don't have the same sales perspective as you guys do, but having that perspective of, working with our accounts, seeing that there's still these gaps, and until they figure out how to fill in the gaps, they're going to continue to struggle, whether it's a recession or when we come out of this and things are going really well, because they still can't have all that accountability.
Speaking of that, though, so on the reporting tool side, even before that, I agree, by the way, but even before the tools itself, is the internal buy-in on how we're reporting on success. Like, and what's so crazy? Whenever we hear stories of, well, we've had to cut this technology, is like no one ever says, and it's forced us to redefine how we're going to report on a particular metric that's important to the business. I've never heard that. It makes me wonder,
it doesn't go that
are
far.
any of these tools tied to any sort of metrics? And I think we've long talked about marketing's lack of procurement chops. I think that sort of speaks to it, right?
Yeah.
But if your CRO is heavily tilted towards sales, and or maybe you just have a marketing leader and a sales leader, and whoever's, to your point, Chris, like I don't know if it was on the podcast or upstairs, but whoever's in the room and whoever's owning the decision around the number, right? That's the person that's gonna have the greater authority and probably credibility in those meetings, especially if we don't have the numbers, like to your point, Robin, the attribution to back it up. So those events, those in-person events, who's making the decision? Is the marketing leader actually standing up and saying, these are the 5 events that we absolutely have to do this year. This is the way we're going to go about driving the number. We're going to have this type of messaging to support it. And what we need is field sales people to support those engagements. Or is it the sales leader saying, these are the 5 events we need, or this is how we're going to do it? Marketing, you just go back us up. We just need you to create the brochures and make it look pretty,
The
and
messaging,
and send
exactly.
the emails
Create
up.
our booth.
So now your leader's kind of getting the legs chopped off, because they're like, okay, I'm just the person that whips up a pretty deck. I'm not actually here to make any big decisions.
I hope it's not happening too often, because that's sort of resetting marketing back to like.
Well, I actually think that could be what's happening.
I don't disagree, but it's a bad outlook for the function of what marketing should represent.
Exactly.
It's very bad. Well, I'm just thinking of just a trade show as an example, right? So in a perfect world, right? So marketing is responsible for that trade show, driving leads, bringing them into the sales team. The sales is properly attributing the opportunities back. Perfect marketing has the ability to say, this trade show drove X. But as we know, a lot of these in-person events, it might not result in direct opportunities right away, but there is that brand recognition. I know, Kev, one of the points you said about people are not as focused on the brand awareness, but I've actually read some interesting content recently that there is more of a focus on the brand awareness. And the challenge with that is that it's not always as easy to connect back to the opportunities, right?
Yeah.
So if marketing's not at the table for something like looking at this like a trade show, and someone's not saying, well, hey, actually, we got a lot more website visitors, after the trade show. We got more downloads from our website. Well, the sales team's not seeing that, but guess what? Marketing should be seeing that, saying, okay, there is a reason to go to this trade show.
I'll go a step further, like on a even more potential real example would be, we got the weeks following a big time industry event, we got an uptick of organic leads.
Yeah.
Where do you think those came from?
Exactly. But sales doesn't see that, because if it doesn't, well, it depends. They may
They
or
say
may not
our
see
SEO
this.
is good.
Exactly. But that's another reason. If nobody's listening to marketing, that they're missing that opportunity.
There's a lot lately about how to engage the CEO, CFO, because what was happening back in the big growth years was, hey, like the marketing director had budget. You could basically do a deal with the marketing director, and that was it. Well, what we've noticed, what's changed, is that now we ask about budget, and it's like, well, we got a few things that we're competing with on this, for this area.
That's a great call out. Is there anyone more busy right now than a CFO? Because
No.
everyone is having to root through that person.
They have to, because now all of a sudden, like the focus being on being alive as a company
Surviving.
and surviving.
Survival.
So it's like, so everyone's getting shot, and and you've got basically the CFO is left
Laid
holding the bag
Yeah.
on okay, so now it's like the CFO is looking at all these different things on basically a crash course in marketing and sales and operations and everything else, because they need to basically be okay with what's being spent, not like it was in
Right.
21 and 20 and
challenge
21.
for marketers, unlike IT and ops, who have more of those procurement chops and can really relate spend back to either cost efficiencies or whatever. The CFO is going to marketing leaders and saying, okay, you're going to do this spend of whatever, technology, services. What do we get for it? And if that marketing leader can't clearly articulate the business value,
Yeah.
it's probably not happening.
Nope.
That is exactly what's happening. So as a result, you've got and again, it's going to have long-term impact, because if you suddenly decide, you know what, this is not what we're going to do with our discretionary spend, then what's the effect in 6 months?
But
12 months?
I think that's a really good point. And I think, part of what we were talking about earlier was that these programs scaled up to such magnitude, especially if you've been on the bandwagon of buying MarTech and you've got MOps people and, they've been allowed to sort of run wild and, from a salary perspective and all this kind of stuff. And now you see all these, as Chris says, I'm not saying it, shot. They're getting shot, which means laid off, by the way. They're not actually getting
They're
shot.
not actually getting killed.
Yeah.
It's a violent
definitely
podcast.
So now you're reining it in, but I don't think, I hope not anyway, we're talking about turning off all marketing. I think what's happened is these teams have scaled out of control, or their programs have run, where they're saying, hey, we're going to run all these lead gen. Hey, we're going to run all this performance marketing and we're going to buy all this technology, and it's supposed to do something, right? Whereas they're saying, the sales leaders are saying, well, it's not really doing anything. We don't feel the impact. And we're going to be doing all this other stuff in order to drive real face-to-face or real handshaking or whatever it's going to be. But obviously we need to keep the lights on. Obviously we need to have, if you're B2B, we need to have a strong LinkedIn presence. We need to have content that goes out there. But guess what? That's not $1 million a year for most mid-sized organizations to go keep the lights on. It's a lot less, right? To say, hey, we got a strong foundations of marketing. Oh, so that salespeople can point to stuff and know that it's working, but it's not a 15-way team with, a ton of money being spent on all this stuff, right?
It's kind of like a healthy recalibration
Yeah.
of program technologies to support maybe sort of overall use of resource and budget. That all sounds pretty reasonable.
It does.
Unless you're the
does.
marketing team that grew up with it for the last 8 years, and then they're like, oh, wait, what?
But that's kind of my accountability point. Sorry, Robin, to interrupt, but is how many marketers are out there that I need these 3 tools and that they can't really connect it to value, and it's really just job justification.
No, we did. I mean, we were in, even that fintech, when we won't name names, right? I mean, and comes over from a big bank organization, given the dream job, small fintech, to go grow and scale. And hey, I need all this. I put together my plan and budget, and then you go, no, there's no plan and budget. You're the person. Roll up your sleeves and start typing.
Pick up the phone.
Meaning
plus we're going to need you to qualify some leads.
Right.
Every now and then.
You're a marketer, you're in sales.
Yeah.
So you mean no marketing technology to be able to support?
No,
all
I'm
of
just
that,
saying you
or
grew up
there's-
if you, like you said earlier, you grow up in that environment and you're used to it for what, right or wrong, you're used to having the tools, the budgets, get in ancillary resource, right? All this kind of stuff. And
Well, you've
then
been
they're like,
talking
no,
to
no, no.
marketers your whole career. You've been talking to
In a
marketers.
bull
Everyone
market.
agrees.
Well, no, what
Everyone
Kev said,
agrees.
in a bull market, right?
Everyone agrees that you need all this stuff until it's 2023.
All of it.
And then you don't need all that stuff.
Yeah.
You don't need it now.
Because I think
Apparently.
it'd be an interesting challenge to a lot of marketing leaders. So here's today's stack. What could you survive with? What can you not live without?
I think that's more of it, as opposed to everybody agrees
Yeah.
you need it, but okay, but
How much do you really know? I don't know if we agree. I don't know.
Really
I'm not agreeing with that. I don't think we need all this stuff.
But you need
What
a
stuff?
core baseline.
All the stuff that we're talking about, like a scaled up, all these ancillary pieces to a I think you need some stuff, and I
Yeah.
think what we're kind of aiming at are people that aren't connected with the realities of a business that needs to function and actually make some cash flow every now and then.
Okay, so we're talking about the fact that marketers have had this kind of like, not a blank check, but basically a lot more rope to kind of go out and do some stuff,
Right.
growth market and everything else.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden we got this looming, kind of slowdown happening, and all of a sudden the CFO comes in and says, I need you to justify this stuff.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
what we're talking
That's what
about.
we're talking
It's
about.
called
justify
It's
this.
called like you have to be so much more connected to the finances as a marketer now, whereas you didn't before. So instead of looking at technology to support and scale a program, the flip now is technology to support revenue goals, and they're very, very
Yeah.
different because, especially MOps, like the new gen of MOps or even sales ops, they're just like, well, I need these 5 pieces of technology, and in an ideal world, maybe you would have them, but those support some of what you're trying to do, but they're not the reason for growth. And if you really peel it all back, it's, do we have the right audience fit? Do we have the messaging? Do we fundamentally understand how to drive a level of demand and interest and then capture it such that I can put it in my Chris O'Neill equivalence inbox and he or she can go run a good sales process? Do you need the
Right.
sales ops ×3 tools? Maybe not.
No, I think we're all agreeing that there has to be accountability, right? That makes sense. It's logical. It's a sound business decision to say you have to be accountable for what you're doing to be able to show the returns from your investment. But you have to be strategic when you think about it, instead of just saying, well, I'm just going to look at what happens at the very end. That's all my focus. I'm going to invest all my money there. Well, that's not actually the right decision. The decision is, let's look at this from end to end, saying, what do I need to support from a resource perspective, from a technology perspective, from a strategy perspective, because that's what's going to make most sense. And, going back to saying, well, what role is making this decision? Does this role actually have all the information, everything that, whether it's experience, expertise, whichever it is, to be able to say, yeah, these are the right things that we need to keep in place so that we can continue and to invest and grow, right? Revenue, really important, but we're having all the pieces in there to be able to do this properly, track it properly, and say we're making the right decisions.
So on that, the word continue, I think, of all the important things you just said, is kind of crucial, because we've seen over the years, like 10 years ago, it's like, here's your annual budget, do as you will with it. And I think that was less about sort of bull times so much as it was about, that's just kind of how it always ran. And then I think we saw a shift probably over the last 6 or so, maybe 8 years, I don't know, to more of like, well, we're going to sort of plan now more quarterly. Things are changing. And now I think what we're seeing is everything's accelerated some more. And it's like, we're going to see things on a campaign by campaign basis. That might be less than a quarter, it might be a few weeks. And it's, hey, if this campaign does really well, we'll probably continue. But because things are so volatile in the broader markets, it's, we don't know. You might crush it and we still have to peel back because of greater uncertainties and looming fears of whatever.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it. So like, marketers are now held to, it's like, what have you done for me this week? And you're not given nearly as
Right.
much slack as to, well, this has been a good contributor over the years. It's now.
Plus,
Yeah.
I think there's a level of credibility, like you talked about, and we'll wrap this up. I know we're probably getting to the limit. There's lots we could keep going on, but you talked about accountability, and it's like, I understand what we're saying. We want to hold the marketing leader accountable for the results, and they need to have the right type of attribution to even understand what it is to begin with. But I think I almost sort of feel like there's this credibility lost. There's almost like the leader has lost some credibility going into those meetings now for whatever reason. Maybe it's a new CEO that's like, hey, the jig's up. Like,
But are you saying that's because of what they are or aren't doing, or you're saying it's a bigger thing than that?
No, I think it's just like, I think it's a function of maybe just the last several years of trying to get some level of growth marketing together, or maybe, just looking at it over even a 4 or 5 year period saying, hey, you know what, a lot of the stuff that you guys are doing, it's not really adding a lot for whatever reason. You didn't integrate sales and marketing, you didn't run the right stuff, you drove some leads, maybe they were good, maybe they're not, but at this table, I don't believe that you're enough of a business leader to be able to demand a budget and deliver the performance. I actually kind of feel like, even for us as an agency, some of our alignment may actually start to become more to that CRO, more to that sales leader for the next couple of years, if those marketing leaders in those organizations simply do not have the chops at the table anymore.
Or the authority.
The authority.
Now, I'm going to put you on the spot. If you had to pick one, you can only pick one. Is it more on this is a reflection of the marketing leader not being accountable for where the investment is going? Or is it more like they're a victim to having to play the scale up game and they haven't had time to really correlate it in the back end?
Ooh.
I don't know. I think they've had time. I definitely think they've had time.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I think it's, I think if you grew up, as a marketing leader over the last 8 to 10 years, maybe you've even been at the organization longer than that, but the bulk of your time as a marketing leader has been through that bull run that you talked about earlier, and just the ever increasing craziness around MarTech and what this stuff is supposed to do for the organization, how it's supposed to bring value. And now you're in a position where it'd be like, oh, actually, we're going back to brass tacks. Guess what? It actually needs to do something, and we can't have all this. We're gonna have to chop your team by 40%. And by the way, you still need to try to deliver something. I think that's a shock to the system. I think that it's almost unfair to your point, but that's their own fault. They should have been more of a business leader to begin with and said, hey, what are we actually doing here? We're running around, blowing a bunch of money, doing a bunch of stitching together.
Well, they thought they thought they were doing great because it was like growth at all costs, whatever it is that it takes. Don't worry about the burn rate. Don't worry about that. Okay?
Cost per MQL.
If you're not growing, you're dying. Right, to stay on your shot theme.
That's where I think we're at. I think it's going to be interesting.
Well, we'll see what February looks like.
Yeah.
Which will be
ahead.
different.
Yeah, couple weeks. We'll see how this changes even more. All right, guys. I don't know. We just got to keep
onward and upward.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was a good effort, team.
Yeah.
Great combo.
That was an okay podcast. It was okay.
I think, we'll
can
see.
improve.
We'll see what our audience
Kev,
says,
Like and
right?
subscribe.
Okay.
Push the thumbs up button if you're on YouTube. If you're on Spotify, we're like third down from Joe Rogan.
Oh,
so we're getting up there. He's
don't
gonna
click
be
on Joe.
He's going to be on our podcast soon.
He's crazy.
By the way, yeah,
He's crazy.
Maybe I'll go there. So, or the Chicklet podcast, one of the two. Okay, that's all we have. Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
guys.
Peace out.
Bye.
Peace.